Hey, this is Leo for Actualized.org. And in this episode, I'm going to be talking about the trap of projection, especially your tendency to project onto teachers and mentors. There's a nasty phenomenon that I want to talk about, which is called projection. This episode is going to be all about projection, all about the subtleties of projection, which is especially problematic for those of us who are self-help junkies and who read a lot of self-help books, go to seminars, retreats, watch a lot of videos. If you're watching various people on YouTube or other places, that sort of thing. If you're reading and listening to a lot of audiobooks, right? You're coming into contact with teachers and mentors. That's what I mean by teachers and mentors. And so, yes, even though you do a lot of projection onto all sorts of other people in your life, we're going to talk about that. But mostly what I want to focus on here is the trap of projecting onto teachers and mentors, because this becomes especially problematic as you go deeper into your development. Just as a story, I remember I was reading some kind of like yoga, some sort of yoga book. It was like there was a story there about some Hindu yogi, and basically he went around and he was like this yoga master, right? Enlightened and knew how to meditate and all this kind of stuff, and he was very much revered. And this one student, he had a brief encounter with this guy, and then the master left, and then the student was so enraptured by the master that he's like, oh, I got to go find the master again. So he spent 2 years traveling all around India looking for the master, because the master was just like a wandering ascetic yogi, right? And then the student finally found him after 2 years, but he finds the master, and the master is a debaucher, and he's there cavorting with naked women and drinking booze and eating lots of food. And so he's living this very materialistic lifestyle, this master. And the student, what he does is he just ignores all that and just comes up to the master and just proclaims his faith in the master and his desire to learn from him. And that was the master's test. That was the master's test. Because see, what the master was testing him on is whether he would be judging the master and projecting his own stuff onto the master by seeing him in this sort of materialistic situation. Now, that's just a story. I'm not saying it's true or anything, but that's just a clever little story, which I think illustrates what I want to communicate here about projection. I know that the reason that I wanted to even shoot this episode is because over the last year, I've traveled to quite a few different retreats about consciousness, like some really deep, advanced inner work type stuff with various teachers and gurus and some very profoundly enlightened people. Like, wow, just like mind-blowing levels of consciousness these people have. Like, you would not get to that point if you did 40 years of nonstop work. That's the level they're at. And what I found, though, is that I'm sitting there for a week at this retreat, learning a lot of great stuff, but also projecting a lot of my issues onto the teacher. And for me, the way this happens is a lot of like intellectual, philosophical sort of criticisms, nitpicking of what they're saying, or they say one thing that I don't agree with during the whole week, and then I'm like wrapped up in it. And I'm thinking about it, and then that makes me question everything. And maybe I'm thinking like, oh, well, how can they be so ignorant if they're so enlightened? How could they be so ignorant about this thing or about that thing? Or, they were factually wrong on this point here. So these little criticisms. And also sometimes I found out like personal things about these teachers where it's like, oh, this person, he was divorced twice. I didn't know that. I've been going to this retreat now multiple times, and only now I find out he's been divorced twice. Like, wow, that changes my perspective, because I assumed that, he had this whole relationship thing handled. And so that makes me start to, project. So this is projecting of my stuff onto the teacher. And of course, what this does is this interferes. The reason this topic is so important is because it interferes with your ability to really learn what the teacher has to offer you. See? So I've started to catch myself doing this. And that's been very important, because otherwise what happens is that I just kind of go into monkey mind, into my own stuff, and I don't really see my own agenda here. And then I don't get the full value of the workshop or the teaching. And I've noticed that not only do I do this with workshops, I do this with authors too. Like if I'm listening to an audiobook or I'm reading some sort of book, I make projections, which are all to do with me, but not much to do with the actual teaching. You know, some teacher will talk about some concept that I don't believe in, like maybe past lives. And then all of a sudden now I can't listen to that teacher anymore because like, oh, past lives, you know, if you believe in past lives, then I can't really listen to you. Or this teacher uses some kind of words that I don't maybe quite jive with. And then it's like, but that now makes me kind of go into this criticizing mode where I'm criticizing the teacher for doing this, doing that, and this is wrong. And I start to nitpick and I have a whole argument in my mind about it. And I've noticed that this sets me back. I've also noticed that this happens with a lot of people who are following me, because I'm sensitive to it from both ends. I'm sensitive to it when I'm doing it. I'm also now sensitive to it when it's being done to me, because it happens to me quite a bit. But before I get into that, let's talk about what projection is. Let's define it. What is projection? And of course, projection not only happens with your teachers and mentors, but it happens with every buddy that you run into in your life. So your parents, your kids, your spouse, your girlfriend, your boyfriend, your friends, your boss, your coworkers, all that stuff, right? So what it is when your needs, your fears, your cravings, and your agenda and ego color or distort how you see people. Okay. That's what I'm defining as projection. It's when you basically superimpose your emotional baggage, your own stuff that's happening with you, all your own shit, so to speak, and you superimpose that onto others, and you interact with them without being aware that, oh, this is my shit. It's not really their shit, and it's not really pertinent to them at all. And it says nothing about them, even though I think that this stuff is about them. It's really all about me, but I'm not seeing it. And that's what projection is. Also, with projection, you're making a lot of assumptions about the other person. Without really knowing them too well, you make a lot of assumptions about them, about what they say or about what they believe, or about what their personal life is like, based on your needs, right? On my needs. If I'm doing it, I'm making these assumptions based on my needs, not based on actual reality and the facts of what I know about this person, but just based on my needs. Like maybe I have a need to know about enlightenment. And then that becomes my need, and I project that need onto the teacher, where in fact, maybe he doesn't care if I know about enlightenment or not, but I do. That's my need. And then that distorts or colors now my interactions and my ability to listen to him. Or maybe I have a need of like security, financial security. Or maybe I have a need of love and being in a relationship and staying married. But the things that the teacher is telling me might mean that my marriage is going to dissolve. Or it might mean that my financial situation is going to get worse or something like that. Or might seem as though it's threatening to me in some way, right? Because what he's saying might run counter to my needs and my defense mechanisms around my needs. And I make all sorts of assumptions about that on him. Also, what happens is thinking what the other person is thinking. So it's like you try to assume, what is that person thinking? Oh, he's probably thinking this, and he's thinking this, and he's thinking this. Like maybe he thinks I'm bad. Maybe he thinks I'm a bad student. Maybe this person there thinks that I'm fat, or that I'm ugly, or that I'm being too noisy, or I'm being inconsiderate, or that I'm not dressed really nice. Right? And so this kind of trying to think what the other person is thinking. This is a classic neurotic symptom, which of course produces a lot of anxiety, produces shyness, produces introversion, produces a lot of suffering for you. And of course, this happens with teachers. You do it to teachers is you try to think what they're thinking. But probably if you're dealing with an advanced teacher, then you're not actually thinking what they're thinking. And this is different than actually stepping into somebody else's shoes and changing perspectives. I think that looking at the world from other people's perspectives is a very powerful strategy. And I'll talk more about that in future episodes. So there's nothing wrong with that. What I'm saying here is that you're not really doing that. What you're doing here is you're sort of stepping into the other person's shoes, but still keeping your mind and all your baggage and all your emotional stuff, which is not really adopting their perspective. That's like you being blind to your own perspective. It's really the opposite. Also, a lot of judgments and criticisms get made. A lot of them are all often very petty ones. Like you could judge or criticize a person's shirt. A person is standing up there lecturing and you're judging and criticizing his shirt, which has nothing to do with the lecture. Or you're judging and criticizing his haircut or something like that. Or, they might be more pertinent judgments. So that goes on. There's a lot of stories. You start to create stories about this person, about their personal life, stuff that you have no idea about really, but you're creating this whole narrative in your mind, and then that person is sort of now seen in that context, this artificial fantasy construct that you've created. Now the person is in that milieu. And that, of course, changes how that person is seen by you and how you feel about that person. And this is, of course, how enemies get created. So the creation of enemies is a classic projection. If you feel like you have enemies in life, it's because you're projecting them. You don't really have enemies in life. That's a projection. And also, you create disagreements, right? So if you're ever disagreeing vehemently with somebody, especially you're driving down the road in your car and you're still disagreeing with them, even though they're not there, you're disagreeing with them in your head, that's projection. And also, generally, what I found is this kind of feeling like you know the person just because you've listened to them a couple of times. Like maybe you've gone to a couple of lectures or watched a couple of videos, or maybe you even watched 100 videos. And then you think like, oh, okay, now I got the sense of this guy. I know who he is. I know his personal story. I know his motivations. I know all this kind of stuff. When in fact, you don't. So like I said, there are two main forms of projection that I want to distinguish here, which is all the other people in your life, like your spouse, your family, your boss, your kids, which is actually the majority of your life. So you project a bunch onto all these people. And that's important to look into because you're not going to have a satisfying life until you stop all that projecting. But here I specifically want to focus on projecting onto teachers, the second form, because I think with teachers, it's especially dangerous. Why is it dangerous? Well, it's dangerous because, see, your spouse, your family, and your boss and your kids, they do not have the information that you need to self-actualize. Most likely, they do not have the insights and wisdom and knowledge that you will need in order to extract yourself from this deep psychological hole that you find yourself in, from all the delusion that you're in, from ego. They will not help you with that. Most likely. Now, in some rare cases, maybe they could. But in most cases, they won't. And in fact, they'll only drive you deeper down into that hole. But the teachers and mentors, they are really your only lifeline. They can help you. So now imagine that the only lifeline you have, you cut that lifeline. That's why it's dangerous. See? Because they are your only source of improving yourself, really. Because in many cases, the people around you can't help you. The people closest to you can't help you. And even you are helpless to help yourself. So how do you help yourself? Well, first of all, by getting the right information, which is why Actualized.org exists, which is why thousands of self-help books exist, which is why thousands of seminars are held across the country, all around the world. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry, providing you with very valuable information. Except what's the biggest trap that people fall into with this information? Well, they just dismiss it. They cut that lifeline and they say something as silly as like, oh, self-help. Self-help, we all know that shit doesn't work. Oh, self-help, so silly. And yeah, I've read a couple of self-help books, but what do they really do for me? Nothing. Those people who read self-help books, they're the most neurotic ones of all. some little dismissive thing like that, and you have cut yourself off from, billions and billions of bits of incredibly valuable data, which you need to transform your life. And the ego knows what's going on, because the ego's job is to stay put. The ego doesn't want to transform and change and self-actualize. So all the ego has to do, if it really wants to stay the same and not to grow, is that it just has to tarnish the messenger, the teacher or the mentor. That's the person who can change you the most. Not in the sense that they're going to do all the work for you, but that just they have the capacity to present a new piece of information or a new insight for you that will actually jostle something in your mind so that now you're on a new path in life. See, your life won't change overnight, but over the years, it can change quite a lot. But the ego, what will it do? It'll tarnish the messenger so that you don't listen to the messenger. And then you can just stay on your dead-end path in life. Right now, I want you to do a very little exercise very quickly. Recall for me all the judgments you've made about teachers or mentors in your entire life. Just let your mind come up with stuff. And I mean all the books you've read, of all the seminars you might have gone to, of all the YouTube videos you might have watched, of all the different information you might have received, from religious sources, from scientific sources, from self-help sources, from whatever, from me. Try to recall any kind of snap judgments that you've made about those teachers, about how they look, about their life, about how they talk, about the information they present, all that stuff. Both good and bad ones. Just try to get a sense of how many of these judgments you make. That's the only point of this exercise, right? I'm not going anywhere further with this, just to get you aware that you do make a lot of judgments about your teachers. And I want you to just simply to become more aware of that over time as you're on this journey. Because you know what? If you're really serious about self-actualizing, you're going to have to get your hands dirty. You're going to have to read a lot of books. You're going to have to watch a lot of videos and sort through a lot of content because you simply lack the information you need. You don't even understand yet where you need to be going. You don't even have a map of where you need to go in life. So first, you're going to spend a couple of years just constructing that map. And I hope to help you with that. Hopefully, I have already helped you with that. But just notice, in the construction of that map, you will be severely retarded if you project a lot onto all the different people that you're learning from. And I hope that you are learning from a variety of people, not just from me, or from 2, or from 3, but I'm talking dozens, if not hundreds. That's the ideal. So you get a variety of perspectives. And you start to see the common patterns between the teachings. Viewers project on me all the time, and I've become very sort of sensitive to it. Actually, I've just developed kind of a thick skin around it so that the kind of criticism doesn't bother me, but I've become sensitive to the following thing. I see, because I read hundreds of comments every day. I've probably read like over 100,000 comments left on Actualized.org. Like I kid you not. It says consumed hundreds of hours of my time. Now you might wonder, well, why do that? That seems very wasteful. Well, in a sense, it kind of is. It's a bit of an addiction reading all these comments. I like it, but also I have learned a lot. There's a certain connection with my audience that I feel I have, and a certain understanding of people's problems that I wouldn't have otherwise understood. So I'm actually quite grateful for reading all the comments, and I do enjoy it. But what I've found is people make shocking projections on me. Like all their fucking issues, they project on me. It's so funny. And when I see this, sometimes it's shocking to me, not in that it hurts me and that it's so painful to me, but simply in that, wow, this person really believes this thing about me, which is totally false, but somehow they got the idea that it's true about me. I don't know where they got this from because I didn't say it, but somehow they came up with it. Their mind came up with it, concocted that as nothing. And now they really like think that that's who I am and that this is what my life is about and this is what my teachings are about. And that's just kind of shocking to me because I can see the unconsciousness happening there. And then, of course, when I see that, I always think, oh, could I be doing the same thing? And then it's like, oh, yeah, I do the same thing. I do the exact same thing, just in different situations to different degrees with different people. And so seeing projections being made on me has made me aware of how I do it. So that's been very helpful. But I mean, people have projected so much stuff on me like, Leo, you're doing all this just for money. That one I've been seeing quite a lot. Also, I've seen a common one of like, well, Leo, you're supposed to be enlightened. You're supposed to be this enlightened guy, and then I find out you're not enlightened, or like you do this thing that doesn't seem like it fits in with enlightenment. Or it's like, Leo, you're not supposed to be doing drugs because you're talking about personal development, so how dare you talk about psychedelics too? Or how dare you talk about sex and spirituality together on the same channel? Or, Leo, you're not supposed to say fuck in personal development. That's not right. You're not following your own advice of being compassionate and being loving. What happened to this developing higher consciousness and developing the capacity for love? And then you say fuck, and then all that goes out the window. See, what you got to understand is that these are your expectations. These are your assumptions, right? Not really mine. You're setting these standards. You're creating this. And then you're holding me up against that. And then whatever happens, happens. Might be for the good or for the bad. Might make me look bad, might make me look good, right? Some of the stuff people say about me is good, and a lot of great stuff is being said about me, which honestly probably doesn't deserve to be said. Like some people say, oh, Leo, you'd make such a great father. How the fuck would you know if I would make a great father? Or some people are like, oh, Leo, because you talk about all this stuff, your life must be so good, you must be so happy. And I'm not saying I'm unhappy. See, gotta be very careful here. When I'm talking, you have to take me literally rather than having all these kind of assumptions behind what I'm saying. I didn't say my life was bad. I didn't say my life was good. I'm just kind of like leaving it open. But then see people then interpret that as like, oh, well, does this mean Leo is actually depressed? Oh, see, but then that would be your interpretation of that. I'm not saying one way or the other. Or, you know, sometimes people are like, well, Leo, you use the word God or you use the word spirituality. These are kind of words that I don't like to hear from teachers about personal development. I like the scientific, rational kind of personal development. Why are you talking about God and spirituality? This has no place here. And I know that in the past, I've been that way with self-help teachers. Is that anytime they said the word God, I would just steer clear, close the book. But that's my issue, right? Or that's your issue if you have that kind of issue with me. Or sometimes people are like, oh, Leo, you ignored one of my comments, and da-da-da-da, and if you ignore my comment, that means this. Why are you doing that? And it's like, it's got nothing to do with me. I might have just like been busy that day. But the person has this whole story about like, why did you ignore my comment? And that's interesting, right? That's interesting to me. Just because it starts to show of how much we really construct these kind of fantasy images of the people we interact with in life. Rather than the way that they actually are. We see them as they are for us, which gets us into a lot of trouble in the end. A lot of trouble. So yeah, those are some of the projections that people have made about me, and that's all fine. I expect that. I'm not saying, I'm not trying to whine about it or anything, but it's just be careful, especially about the more nuanced stuff that I talk about. Especially the enlightenment stuff. Be very careful about what kind of projections you make onto me, and not just onto me, but onto any teacher that you listen to. And I hope you're listening to lots and lots of different teachers. I want you to recognize that you don't really know anything about your teachers. Like if you read somebody's book, you almost have no idea of anything about that person's personal life. You don't know him just from reading his book, even if you read 10 books of his. Nor from watching 100 of my videos do you really know anything about me, or my motives, or my level of development, or my personal story. All right, you don't know these things. You really don't know these things. But it's very easy to assume stuff, especially with the video format. It's easier. to start to assume stuff. And even if you meet people in person, like at a seminar, you still don't really know anything about the person. Even if you spend a whole week at a seminar with them, that's a very specific context that you're in. See? And these stories that you concoct about people and your teachers, just be very careful, because what they really do is they are subtle, sneaky distractions from turning inward and doing the work that you got to be doing on yourself. Because when you're busy thinking and fantasizing about other people and how they're doing something wrong, or even how they're doing something right, I mean, even if you love the person and you think he's awesome, that's still a story, and it's still a distraction from listening to the information they present to you. Because you know what? You might love something I'm saying, and then I say something wrong, and then you agree with it just because maybe you have an affinity towards some personality quirk of mine or whatever. And that's a setback for you. See? It really helps when you get projected on to see this. So right now, as a little exercise, I want you to think of some time in your life where somebody assumed something about you, projected something onto you that was completely false, but they really thought it was true of you. And they thought that you really were this kind of way. But it wasn't true at all. And to you, it was kind of ridiculous and also a bit shocking how they could be so clueless or how they could be so wrong. Think of a time like that. I'm sure you've experienced that at least once in your life. And the more you can recall those times, the more you can start to appreciate that you also do that. And you do it on both very gross levels and also very subtle levels. Especially when you already kind of like the teacher, you probably won't do it on the gross level. You probably won't call him an idiot. You probably won't outright demonize him, but there will be some little stuff that you will nitpick and project that might take you years to realize that you're actually doing. Here's the key insight that I want to give you in this episode, is that when you're relating to other people, 99% of the time, you're actually relating to yourself. You're not really relating to them. It takes a lot of spiritual purification work, a lot of consciousness work to get to the point where you can relate to a human being not as he or she is for you, but as they simply are. That takes years of work to get to that point. Okay? This is huge. This is huge. This will transform all your relationships, what I'm saying here, if you really take this on as something to correct in your life. And the way you start to correct it is just by simply becoming more aware of it first, right? Awareness here is very curative in this case with projection. All you really got to do is just to start to see how you're actually doing it with every individual in your life. And especially with individuals who you disagree with. So anybody you're in disagreement with in your life, whether your spouse, your family members, your teachers, your mentors, some author you read that you didn't like or whatever, you have to remind yourself and remember that it's all about you. The disagreement is about you. It's not about them. It's not about what you read in a book. It's not about what you heard on TV. It's not what the political candidate said on the television news or some outrageous thing they did that you disagree with. It's not about that. It's all about you and how you're reacting to yourself, your own expectations, your own assumptions, and your own story that you created about that person. And when you start to take responsibility for that and ownership for that, that's when your relationships really start to turn around. And that's also when you can really start to learn from people. Because until then, your mind's not really open to what they have to say. Not really, because you're only listening for what will serve you. And when you start to notice this, you're going to be in shock at first at just how rarely you actually interact with people without projecting on them. Projection is not just something that happens 5% of the time. What I'm saying is that projection happens 99.9% of the time in your life. Pick a person, and we could probably write 10 pages of projections that you make on that person. And the closer that person is to you, the more projections you make on them. Your family members, you make the most projections on, which is why it's so difficult for you to relate successfully with them. So let's try an exercise right now. Because it's just me and you here together, we only have one option for this exercise. So right now, what I'd like you to do is just to sit there and look at me and to see me for myself and not how I am for you. See me for myself, not how I am for you. This means you have to notice any positive or negative projections that you've been making about me. About how I look, about how I sound, about the quality of the things I say. Any stories or assumptions that you've made about me, my personal life, how good or bad you think I am, what you think I eat for dinner, what do you think I do when I go to bed at night or wake up in the morning, what kind of car do you think I drive? Like, drop all that. And just look at me exactly as I am, like literally, with no assumptions. Just do this for 30 seconds. This means you have to relate to me as an unknown. Because you see my head here, you hear the words I'm saying, and that's all you have of me, really. Maybe you have some memories of stuff I said in the past. Okay, fine, you can have those. That's fine, but nothing more, because you really know nothing more about me. Which means that you don't really know who you're dealing with here. And that's exactly what I want you to experience right now. Experience me as an unknown. And let that be okay. It's not good, it's not bad. It just is. And notice the difference between listening to me that way, looking at me that way, versus probably the typical way that you interact with me. Okay? That's the whole exercise. Now, we did it with me because I'm the only person here who you can look at. But I encourage you to also try this out with other people in your life. Try it out with your family members. Try it out with your boss, your coworkers, and so forth. And especially try it out with any teachers that you're listening to, besides myself. This is how I want you to listen to teachers, is as unknowns. They are just like messengers who are delivering a message to you. They're really strangers. They're just like good Samaritans, maybe. Hold them as good Samaritans who are trying to feed you a little bit of information. And your objective, whenever you're listening to a teacher, especially talking about a deep, advanced topic, is to always be conscious of your own agenda at work as you're listening to that teacher. It's like, what are my needs? What are my values? What are my ideals here in this situation? What are my fears and insecurities? And how is that coloring what the teacher is teaching me, or what this book is trying to teach me, or what this video is trying to tell me? You're going to start to notice that a lot of stuff comes up, a lot of subtle stuff that you probably weren't conscious of before. You'll start to see your agenda at work and how much it distorts. And what I want you to do is I want you to pay attention to that and to turn it back around. Any criticisms or judgments you have, turn those back around on you and recognize them like, oh yeah, I'm criticizing that person for being too religious. And what does that say about me? Oh, that says something about me. It says nothing about them. It's all about me. It's like, I'm criticizing that person on television for doing something I disagree with. What does that say about me? Not them, about me. See. What's really interesting is that the most advanced teachings you can have in life are also going to be the most threatening to your ego. That's why they're advanced teachings. You don't hear them very often because most people are so threatened by them that they can't become mainstream. You're not going to hear them on CNN. On CNN, you hear non-threatening stuff. Despite what you might think, if you see violence on TV, that's not a threatening thing to you. I could tell you things that would be much more threatening to you than any kind of violence that you'll see on television. All right, so the most advanced teachings are threatening, and that means that you need to be on guard for how much projection you're going to be doing when you're hearing these teachings. And by the way, that's also another reason why these teachings remain advanced for centuries, because people aren't hearing them. Because even when you do hear them, they're so threatening that you don't really hear them. You run away. Why? Well, you don't run away. I mean, you have to rationalize it to yourself. So you don't say to yourself, "Oh, this is such an amazing advanced teaching and I'm too scared." It never works that way. Your ego is very subtle about this. So what your ego will do is it'll say, "Oh, look at this guy. He's so full of himself. Look how arrogant he is. I bet you this guy in his personal life, he probably has terrible relationships. He probably can't do any of the stuff he's talking about. He's probably a total hypocrite behind the scenes. And so I'm not going to listen to him." Something along those lines. Or maybe even something more subtle than that. Here are some telltale signs of when you're projecting with teachers, I found. Firstly, it's when you have imaginary arguments with a teacher or with a book or something that you've read. Imaginary arguments in your head. It's like, this and this and this. It's like you're here and the teacher is here and you're kind of debating with them in your head. So when you notice that, you know you're projecting. Secondly, is when you start to get into the teacher's life story. You start to want to know, like, what does he do in his personal life? How many kids does he have? Like, Leo, what kind of car do you drive? Like, what kind of clothes do you wear? What about this? What about that? Getting into the personal life. That's when you know you're projecting. And thirdly, I would say when you start to criticize based on little nitpicky things, like, it's like, "Oh, I don't like the word you use there, and I don't like this thing here." And it's like little things. You're nitpicking. Those are the telltale signs. Watch out for extremely subtle levels of projection. Those of you who've already been on this path with me for a couple of years and are going pretty deep, and you've read hundreds of books and you watched thousands of videos from all sorts of different places, you still have to be on guard. I want you to watch out for the extremely subtle levels of projection that you make. Little tiny judgments and things like that, because that's closing your mind down to the deepest teachings that are available. Believe it or not, the thing that holds you back from hearing the deepest teachings is simply a closed mind. And that gets reinforced through projection, big time. Big time. I see it almost every single day in the comments people leave me under the videos. A lot of comments are positive, don't get me wrong, most of them are. But some people, it saddens me, it kind of breaks my heart because, like, I might share a piece of wisdom that took me several years going to multiple $1,000 seminars to acquire this one little piece of information. And then I provide that piece of information for free to somebody. And then that person says something like, "Oh, you're doing this just for money." And then they don't even listen, even though I released it for free. And they say, "No, Leo, you're just doing this for money. You're just doing this to get me on your newsletter thing and then to sell me some sort of course or something. I know what you're all about." Something like that, right? And then they miss this rare gem of an insight that could have changed their whole life simply because they were projecting and their mind was closed. So don't be like that. Instead, I want you to listen inclusively. I want you to listen with generosity, which means that you don't just sit there and nitpick and try to find the flaws in what is being told to you, but you actually sit there with assuming the burden of understanding on yourself, right? A good student always takes it upon himself to really understand what the teacher is saying, even if the teacher says something wrong, even if the teacher slips up here or there, even if the teacher says something that doesn't make sense, the student will be like, oh, wait a minute. How do I get this to make sense? Because he's taken the responsibility for understanding on himself, right? Especially when I'm talking about an advanced topic like enlightenment. Your job is to really carefully parse what I'm saying, to do the work of trying to fit it into your existing models of reality, because those are going to have to change and basically crumble in order to take on some of these new things that are being shared with you, some of these new insights. Take that on, to be open to it, not to blindly believe it, but to be open to it, to listen with generosity and inclusivity rather than taking sides. And then watching out very carefully for any kind of assumptions you make, especially with topics about enlightenment. There's all sorts of little assumptions you can make. Like, I talk about enlightenment, and then you might listen to that whole episode for an hour, and then you might think, oh, well, that means that when I'm enlightened, I'm perfectly happy all the time. And maybe that's your assumption. Or maybe it means, oh, when I'm enlightened, then personal development work becomes irrelevant. I didn't say that. That's your assumption. Or maybe it's like, oh, when I'm enlightened, that means I'm going to have a perfect marriage and I'll never get divorced. I didn't say that. That's your assumption, right? Be careful with these kinds of conclusions. Very careful. The deeper the teaching, the more careful you have to be. Very, very, very careful. And you know what? You will make these assumptions and jump to conclusions of all kinds. I do too. And the only thing you got to do is just to be open enough to go back and to revise those, right? If you have an attitude of openness and you practice radical open-mindedness, then yeah, you'll have these assumptions, but they won't be like impassable roadblocks on this path, like they are for most people. You might think, well, that's how it is for most people. No, it's not. For most people, their minds are so closed that literally you couldn't talk to them about the word enlightenment without all their projections, to the point where they can't even understand even the idea of enlightenment. I'm not even talking about any kind of techniques or spending thousands of hours doing something about it. I'm just talking about just the idea. Just introducing the idea of enlightenment is not possible with probably 90% of the people on Earth. And that's not just because they're stupid and religious. They're also very scientific. And that could even be worse. Or even if they're open to that sort of stuff, they still have all their ideas and all their projections, and they still will not really even grasp the concept of how significant something like enlightenment could be in their life. And that's personally very sad to me. When I see that, it kind of breaks my heart. That's why I harp so much on radical open-mindedness. That's why it's such a big theme for me. That's why I keep insisting on it. And I will in the future. So anyways, that's it. But hold on, I have a worksheet for you. So click the link down below. There's a free worksheet with some questions that will help you to identify the different projections that you make onto people in your life, and especially your teachers and mentors. So go ahead and do that. These exercises are critical for you to actually ground the abstract stuff that I usually say. So that's it. I'm signing off. Please click the like button for me right now. Post your comments down below. I do read them, like I said. Share this episode with a friend. And lastly, come to Actualize.org right here and check out my newsletter. Check out some of the resources I have for you there. I'll be releasing more resources in the future, so you want to stay tuned for that. In general, I want a commitment from you to take control of growth in your life. When you were a kid and a teenager, you grew a lot. Your life was growing every single year. You were learning new stuff. You were having huge insights and paradigm shifts about reality. And then what happened? After college, all that basically stopped. And you told yourself, oh, well, I've matured and here I am, and basically I've maxed out. Well, I got news for you. You have not maxed out. You're not even fucking close. Not even 1%. You're not even 1% there. Not even 1%. There is so much for you to learn about yourself. So many incredible things. And sometimes people tell me, oh, Leo, now you're talking about like maybe quitting Actualize.org. It's because you run out of content. You run out of ideas. You shot 200 videos or something and now you're out of ideas. That's preposterous. I look at that and I laugh because I have at least 200 video topics right now in my journals. Very deep, mind-blowing shit. You would listen to these topics and you would think that all the stuff I released up to now is like kindergarten compared to the stuff that I have to come. A lot of stuff. And that's like 4 years worth of, no, that's like, if I release 50 videos a year, 1 per week, 50 a year, so that's like 200, that's like, what, 2 years worth? No, 4 years worth. Yeah, 50 a year, so 4 years worth. And I could easily generate a lot more. My biggest challenge is how do I get all this stuff out there? Because I only have so much time to assemble and post all this content. And quite frankly, you probably don't want to listen to it all either, all at once. So anyways, my point is that there's a lot to this self-actualization thing. There's a lot of ways in which you can radically transform your life, which would take me hours just to explain them all to you. All the benefits of this work. I hope you have some insight into how powerful these kinds of understandings could be. You have an intuition about that, and that you're willing to follow through on that intuition and commit to it. And the very simple form of commitment you could make, I hope you make a more of a commitment, but at the very least, watch one of these episodes per week so that you're starting to build a big picture understanding of what you should be doing in your life and how you should be growing and what the potential is for you. That alone will eventually start to really transform, but that'll take some time. So, it might take you a year of watching videos to just realize, like, oh shit, this is so important. I got to commit my whole life to this. But if you are at that point already, great, stick around and actually start to take action. Do the worksheets, do the exercises, do them twice, do them 3 times. Start reading books. Check out some of the resources I have for you. Start going to seminars, start meditating, start building techniques and habits. And then your life will transform in amazing ways. So stick with me, and I'll see you soon with more.